I've spent probably 40 years of my life understanding risk because it's a fact of the matter, most people in an efficient market, both buyers and sellers, have similar information. Exercises we should be looking at is making markets more transparent, that buyers and sellers have greater confidence in the information that's available, a time to be totally frank, totally honest, and to bring everything out into the open. Because
hello everyone, welcome to Seven Stones Indonesia's Business Talk, where we continue to talk about different topics going on in Indonesia and in particular Bali. And today you're not going to listen too much to me because I'm going to be the host, and I have our distinguished guest, Mr. Ross Woods, with us today. And the topic that we're going to try to tap into is a few things around the hospitality investments and kind of what we see in that aspect. So I guess to begin with, maybe Ross, I know I could see from our team that they were suggesting that you had at least 30 years experience in the industry. I actually know that it's a bit longer.
That's right, that's right.
And you don't need to tell people first time you came to Bali, but maybe a brief about yourself, where you came from and sort of...
Sure. Yeah. I was a partner with Horwath. It's an international consulting firm in Australia for many years, specialising in feasibility studies, basically in terms of hotels and resorts, but also involved in transactional advice. And I spent 15 years with Horwath in Australia, and then I went to the United States and worked for Prudential Real Estate Investors and oversaw the hotel portfolio. And then I set up my own consulting practice in New York, providing primarily transactional advisory services to REITs, real estate investment trusts. And I've been in Indonesia now for about 4 years, providing similar services to clients who own hotels. Unfortunately, not enough investors are selling hotels here in Indonesia, but that's another story.
Maybe touch a little bit on that. Why do you think that? Why isn't there more, investors? Like we talk about foreign investors or even domestic investors. There's an awful lot of hotels, anything from a boutique hotel up to a bigger sort of resort, but there seem to be less activity than what you would expect with a market size like Bali and other parts of Indonesia.
Sure. I think it's a cultural issue. It's taken me 2 to 3 years to truly understand the concept of hotel ownership in Indonesia in terms of some of the major conglomerates and the major hotel owners. They look at, given that you're paying significant mortgages, interest rates in this country, that most investors, domestic investors, if they can meet debt obligations in the first 4 or 5 years of a hotel's existence, then they assume that the rest will look after itself. In other words, they're more interested in capital preservation than capital appreciation. Whereas in the West, people are attempting to get a final sale after a 5 or 10 year holding period, and are looking at the velocity of hotel sales and capital appreciation to reinvest in other hotels. So I think it's a cultural issue that people tend to look, here in Indonesia, at long-term investment.
Asset play, generational play.
Yes, it's a generational, family-owned business, and people say, we value this asset, and it's also reflected in a lot of the institutional investors in the country are more interested in greenfield developments than brownfield. They're interested in developing. There's a status involved in developing new hotels, new resorts, rather than buying a hotel that may be 15, 20 years old to recapitalise it, to renovate it, and to give it a new life.
We just sat together and we had a chat with a client just before this too, and you mentioned something about the understanding of the market and the transparency of data and the discrepancy between buyer expectation or information and sellers' information expectations.
Yes. Well, I think, Terry, in an efficient market, both buyers and sellers have similar information, and in the main they can agree on 95% of the information that appears in an information memorandum. They may differ in terms of what something is valued or what it's worth. And so, I think that, one of the exercises we should be looking at is making markets more transparent, that buyers and sellers have greater confidence in the information that's available. And because at the moment we have what I'd call, there's friction, deal friction. Most people spend an inordinate amount of time attempting to get the information. The information should be in place. Yeah.
Oh, it's quite, I think someone was mentioning the other day too that in terms of turnover, and this is probably more towards villas and individual or purchase of smaller boutique resorts or number of villas, and it kind of excludes, I think, the hotel market. But as an overall turnover, we're talking about $1.7 billion. It's a substantial market in Bali.
Certainly.
But yeah.
A lot of it's as I said, I think there are a lot of people who probably contemplated selling an asset but don't know what it's worth. How do you value it? And if they don't have some substantive idea of what it's worth, then they'll sort of put it out in the marketplace in the hope that someone will come along and pay them an inordinate price to purchase it.
So one of your focuses in this is in addition to advice on buying and selling, you also provide feasibility studies.
Yes.
And maybe you can talk us through what does that actually include if someone says my hotel is worth X, Y, Z, and you will say maybe yes, maybe no, depending on the sort of main factors. And
Well, there's one of three ways in which we look at the value of an asset, a real estate asset. One is looking at the direct capitalisation. Essentially, we're looking at profit and loss statements and looking at capitalisation and coming up with an estimated value. The other would be sales comparison. We might be looking at 4 or 5 hotels that may have sold on a per room basis. And the other one is replacement. So they're the three methods. But in terms of feasibility studies, essentially we're attempting to look at the location of a property, both the advantages and disadvantages of that location compared to, say, competitors. We need to identify competitors, not in a simplistic way. We really need to understand, what hotel properties that are in the market, how they compete with competitors, and new hotels that may be in the development pipeline, how they might compete. And then essentially we go through the exercise of coming up with projected room rates and occupancies. And that's normally over a 3 to 5 year period. And then we look at the concept of a stabilised income stream over, say, a 10-year period. And then we look at comparable hotels and we use benchmarking information to look at the ongoing costs of operation. And we'd be looking at comparable financial information to look at the veracity of information that may be provided by people who are wanting to sell an asset, and then coming up with a direct capitalisation and saying this eco resort is worth $25 million based on these assumptions.
And I guess a big part of that too is projections. A lot of people talk about projections, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about, like, we have growth trends, tourism, maybe partially residential aspect, where is Indonesia going and so on, and how important aspect is that into the sort of overall evaluation?
Well, it's very important. We have to look at not only macro factors, and I guess we probably spend too much time looking at macro factors. We're more important to look at some of the sort of micro regional trends in various markets and how they've been developed over recent years. And look at the volatility as well. We're not only looking at long-term trends, but how those trends may have been volatile at certain times. For whatever reason, oversupply of hotels or resorts, undersupply. Look at demand volatility, how that may have changed. I think of the Chinese market, for example. If you looked at the growth from about 2010 to 2018, the Chinese market to Indonesia was on an enormous trajectory, but of course with COVID, and it really hasn't recovered to the extent that a lot of people thought it would. So we take into account not only economic factors that may have an impact on visitor flow and the types of visitors, and as well as competitive supply and demand as well.
One of the things that we talk about, and we're actually planning to do with you a series of seminars, like a lot of people have data or some kind of listing of resorts and hotels, but like we talk about quite a lot, it's really no content on that. It's how big is the land, how many rooms, and some kind of estimations on price. How do you see that process? If someone really wants to sell a resort, whether it's a boutique resort or a bigger hotel, how do you see that process? What do they need to sort of come to work with, you know?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think this is a time to be totally frank, totally honest, and to bring everything out into the open, because any prudent investor undertaking due diligence will want to look at more than 3 to 6 months financials. And in fact, if we look at what's normally in information memorandums, there's up to 5 years of historical financial information, because investors are wanting to see, you know, what's happening in the cycle, and so I think it's important that sellers understand that this is a serious time for them to lay it all out, and it can be presented in a very professional way that any investor that may be interested will look at it, will make their own assumptions in terms of. And I think it's fair to say that most investors believe they can do a better job than the current owner, and it's one of those things that I've seen a lot of businesses sold. And without gilding the lily, as it were, I think it's just important that the information that's presented is factual, can be supported, and an investor can make if they believe it's optimistic. Many of them might even think it's pessimistic. They can do better than what the current owner is doing.
So asking for a letter of intent.
Well, a letter of intent should not be the first thing. The first thing is an agency agreement. The second thing would be what I call a non-disclosure agreement. The third may be a letter of intent. Now, the letter of intent is normally introduced maybe 1 or 2 weeks before the sale, a purchase and sale agreement is presented. The letter of intent is really the owner may be wanting to know, are there 3 or 4 people who may be interested in my asset?
Yeah.
And so the letter of intent it's a legal document, but certainly not the most important in my perspective.
So now you spent some years already in Indonesia, back and forth a little bit, but more in Jakarta. Now you're here in Bali, and obviously we're not enjoying the sun. It's the rainy season and we're drowning. But I guess one of the things when people ask me what's the difference between Ross Woods and some of the bigger agencies or other personalities out there, how do you sort of tailor your approach to clients or your sort of selling advantage, if anything, in the Bali market?
Well, thanks, Terry. I've spent probably 40 years of my life understanding risk, because it's a fact of the matter, most people involved in hospitality understand what a 10 or 15% rate of return. And if I said to you, I think this hotel will produce a 10% return, there's some agreement. But when it comes to risk, there's no 2 people who have the same perceptions of risk. And all the due diligence, all the feasibility studies, all of that is designed to understand risk and variance to a greater extent. So I guess I believe that when you provide a forecast of a projected rate of return, you should also be talking about the risk associated with that return. So in other words, if I said a 15% rate of return, is there a 20% probability it'll be less than 5? Or a 20% probability it'll be greater than 25? That is how you make a risk-adjusted return. So I guess the very core of a lot of the services I provide, I want to say to an investor, this is what we're forecasting, given all the moving parts to a feasibility study, occupancy, payroll costs, and all that sort of thing. At the end of the day, we think this project will return X, but you need to understand there's a probability, there's a distribution, and there are some hotel investments that probably have a very defined distribution of returns, where others have a more varied. So I spend more time assisting them understanding risk and quantifying it, because if you can quantify something, you have a better chance of managing. But if you don't quantify it, it's an intuitive feeling.
I know you also spend a lot of time, and you have a substantial audience on LinkedIn, and I think more than daily you post different angles and different approaches to several markets, but in particular Indonesia and maybe specifically now Bali. Where do you see, I guess, the hotel, boutique hotel, resort market being right now, and maybe where do you think it should head, and where do you think it's going to head in the next 12 to 24 months?
Sure. When I look back on the hotel development, if you look at some of the evolution of the hotel sector here in Indonesia, it really started with, I guess, Kuta, smaller properties, but also some of the large properties. I think that the days of the big box hotel are numbered. Numbered in the sense that people are wanting smaller personal experiences, and so the 300 to 400, there will be fewer hotels of that larger size developed. So it's I think we're going to see a period of eco resorts, boutique resorts, wellness resorts, all in the sort of 20 to 80, 100 room. And so I think in the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see these continue. Many of them are going to be competing with high quality villas. I think there's a lot of villa development here in Bali. I'd like to be able to put my finger on precisely how many villas are under construction, but so I think there's the eco resort, boutique resort market is
so
very positive.
I guess then if you were kind of looking in on the market in Bali from an investor perspective, and you see these trends and evolutions, I guess, in the market, and people seem to steer clear of the $150 million sort of resort investments. You think that that's going to be then the trend, that a bigger institutional investor or who is going to, coming into the market from a risk perspective, maybe that makes sense in the sense that they can buy 3 or 4 different resorts in different markets. And I guess, how does that fit with also like brands? I know we always talk about brands and big brands who I think still are selling that kind of a concept.
I mean, they are. I think we're at an intersection. I think that brands will be looking. There'll probably be an evolution of new brands that'll be looking at these smaller type resorts, and I think that you'll see. I mean, this is the great challenge because people see the smaller resorts as more personal. They're not sort of the corporate branded type product. So that's the great challenge, I think, for any group that's wanting to take this sort of boutique concept into a multi-destination campaign. So it'll be challenging, but I have no doubt that entrepreneurs will.
I guess then how do you talk about the risk management, and how do you manage that aspect? Because it's like anything in the world today, it's very fragile, volatile. It's moving and it's evolving really quick. But these trends, we don't have a lot of history, I guess, to say that, oh, this is a trend, other than, market maybe, and over the last, 3 to 5 years, maybe in other markets it's been ongoing for some more time, but isn't it a bit more difficult to predict these days?
Well, I guess it is, but that's our business. I mean, we're making probability bets that the boutique resort market is going to be the major market here in Bali in particular, and there will be larger hotels developed, but I don't see the type of investment that we've seen in some of the larger hotels in recent years. So I think it's a matter of looking at consumer demand and looking at the personas that are seeking experiential type experiences in resorts. And if we look around and just see the number of eco resorts, wellness resorts that are being developed, and compare that to the top end of town, then you'll understand that there's a market there, and it's growing pretty rapidly.
No, I think maybe forward we can dig into all this and many other topics, and I think we can have multiple sessions forward, being a bit more detailed into each of them. But I guess my last sort of question or request for a comment from you, what would be your top 3 advice to an investor, foreign investor in this case, or maybe also Indonesian, based in Jakarta or somewhere, looking at the Bali market? What should they take in as considerations before they do the investments?
Sure. I mean, location's obviously important. You know, I think that you'll probably see a large number of developments being developed in areas that don't have the gravitas or don't have the nearby attractions. So I think location. I think competition too. It's one of the great challenges in doing feasibility studies is just who does compete with various properties, and so getting a better handle on who may compete with a concept that's being developed or promoted or has existed for some time is another issue. And then I think some operational issues, you know, that investors need to understand, you know, the operational costs associated with some of these properties, because some of the boutique smaller properties have significant payroll costs, you know, because of the service requirements that are demanded. So I think taking a generic middle of the road approach wouldn't be the way to do, you know, to evaluate opportunities. And at the end of the day, it's looking at the how volatile the income stream is going to be, you know, and I think that as we've seen with some of the larger properties, you'll find segmentation taking place within the, you know, the boutique resort market.
No, thank you. I think that wraps it up for this session, and please give us some comments or even questions below. For more detailed information, please reach out to us too directly to email or WhatsApp, and we'll take it from there. See you in the next episode.